Hey everybody, welcome back. So I just got fresh out of the theater of SHIN Kamen Rider. Just got home and I thought I would record a little off-the-cuff review before my old age-addled brain has forgotten everything. So first I'm going to just give a general overview of stuff, and then after that I'll get a little bit into spoilers. The first part, there might be little tiny things that are, very, very minor that wouldn't really ruin the movie or anything like that. Oh, and also, the video here is just me building the SHIN Kamen Rider BANDAI model kit. So I thought that might be of interest for people as they listen. So just so you know, I've seen most of the original kind of, I guess it's considered one first season, but the show that started in 1971, and then it goes on for like 90 something episodes. So I've seen the majority of that. I haven't gotten quite to the end yet, but I've seen most of it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I really like the character. He's really fun and everything like that. So I am familiar with that kind of world. But modern Rider stuff, I don't know anything about it. I haven't watched any of that. So I guess first I'll just go over maybe some of the characters. That might be a good place to start. So the main kind of characters we're seeing in this is Takeshi Hongo, and he is joined with Ruriko, who is the daughter of Dr. Midorikawa. So in the first episode of the old show, the doctor is the guy who gets Takeshi out of the shocker base where they're experimenting on him and turning him into the rider. So he helps him escape, and then he gets killed. Yeah, this is in the old show. And then his daughter, her and Kamen Rider Takeshi are kind of working together to figure out what's going on and stuff like that. In the posters and everything, you can see a woman, and she is Ruriko, the daughter. So she plays a pretty prominent role in the whole movie. Just from the trailers and stuff, I wasn't sure who she was, but I was guessing that maybe that was the role she was going to play. And just before watching the movie, I watched the first couple episodes again, because I hadn't seen them for a while. But anyways, so those three are in it. And then I'm happy to say that Dr. Midorikawa, he's played by Shinya Tsukamoto, who's one of my favorite directors. He directed Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is a really bizarre, great movie if you've ever seen it. He pops up in movies once in a while. But anyways, he has a nice little role there. Then there's also, of course, the Rider 2. He shows up later in the film. Once again, I'm not going to get into too many details right now, but just generally. But he has a role in it. But he comes in maybe around halfway or something like that. But he's in there. And then, for example, there's a couple other, I'm trying to say this without spoilers. There's a couple other characters from the main kind of human cast of the original show that show up. But mostly it's the Kaijin and the bad guys, and then Rider and Ruriko and Rider 2. Those are most of the human characters. So like all the kids and all the ladies and most of those people from the old show are not in this one. Most of the focus is just on that handful of characters. So speaking of the Kaijin, right, the main kind of shocker bad guys, there's a lot of them. In the trailers you can see there's the spider, there's the bat, a few others off the top of my head. There's the hornet woman, there's scorpion, there's the chameleon, and there's a few others. And the way it kind of plays out, it's interesting. So, the old show was episodic, and each episode would have another Kaijin enemy, and so the movie kind of plays out like that too. So you start out with the spider, which it kind of goes in order of the old show. So the first one you see is the spider. He has his role, and then it goes on to the bat, and then when he gets defeated, it goes on to the next. And they all kind of show up, have their little thing that they're doing, and they all have their own shocker headquarters, just like in the old show, that's kind of themed around them and has their own symbol on the wall. And then when they're defeated, it goes on to the next. But there's still the main through story going along everything, but it's just kind of jumping from bad guy to bad guy. Some of them have really short roles, and then some of them have a bit longer roles and a bit more involved. But it was an interesting balance, having that almost episodic feel along with the main story. It was an interesting kind of take on how the old show was like that. Let's see, the fights. So If you've ever seen the live-action Guyver movie, I'm not sure how many people have seen that, but in that Guyver himself, he's pretty brutal. Like, he's crushing the heads of the enemies that he's fighting. The Zoanoids, isn't that it? Zoanoids. And things like that. He's like popping their eyes and just crazy stuff. Kamen Rider starts out real strong, and he is just killing Shocker left and right. Like, he's literally just punching their heads, and they're exploding, and there's just blood all over the place, and blood splashing all over the forest where they fight. And his hands are covered in blood. Like, he's brutal. And I think that's probably inspired by how in the original show, the original is from 1971, and it was a kid's show. But for the time, and considering it was a kid's show, it's pretty violent. Like, the fights are they're bare-knuckle fights, and so many people die in that old show. And just totally innocent, normal people die, and they end up getting, melted into skeletons or dissolving, or, they get zombified and then they get killed, whatever. The old show was actually pretty violent. And so I think this is kind of playing off of that, where they just kind of amped it up, kind of like how the old show was for its time. Nothing's too gory, though. You don't like see, I don't know, nobody loses an arm or anything like too graphic, and it's all kind of fast, but there's a lot of blood in some of those fights. But it was fun. It matched him. And like the first time he does his rider kick, it's really over the top. It's really fun. It has a big impact when he does it. And once again, it's not gory, but you can definitely feel the power behind it, and they don't hold back on like the big leaps and the big jumps that they have in the old show, or like when somebody will jump and leap and they'll show it 3 or 4 times in a row in sequence. They have that going on. And like, for example, the first fight, I guess I'm jumping around a lot, but we'll just see what comes up here. But in the first fight against the spider, I had watched that first episode like a couple hours before going to the theater, just to refresh myself. And shot for shot, they recreated some of that fight. So like, there's a thing where the shock troopers are all lined up, and the bat's in the middle, the spider's in the middle. And then they kind of pull out, and they all have these bow staffs that they're holding, and then they come towards him. And like, those shots are all exactly the same, and then like they all surround Kamen Rider, and they hit down, and then he's on the ground, and then he kind of jumps up. Like, it's shot for shot, they're recreating all that, which is pretty cool to see just after having watched it in the original. So there's a lot of stuff like that, where obviously they're really trying to pay homage to the original. So one little thing that I think might throw a lot of people off is that a lot of the fighting is filmed very tight and very fast and shaky, really shaky in a lot of shots. So you're not going to get as much of that just kind of pure martial arts spectacle as the old show. Things are much more jarring looking and quick and fast and rough looking. You can follow it. I could follow it fine for the most part, except for something that I'll mention later. I could follow it fine, but it still is pretty hard to watch. In something, I don't know. It's not hard to watch. It's fine, but I think it's going to turn some people off how that's handled. And I was thinking, like, just pull the camera back a little bit, a few times, please, and just show me kind of where people are positioned. That's a really important thing in action and stuff, is to pull the camera back, really show people where they are in the environment so we can get a sense of what's going on. And there wasn't enough of that, I would say. There's a few little nitpicks I have, but they're not so bad. They don't spoil it or anything like that, but that's one of the things I would have liked to have seen. But the fights are pretty brutal. Kamen Rider himself does not hold back at all, and it's fun to see. And so I think that leads into another thing where this movie is kind of 3 different styles going on. I guess I should have mentioned this earlier. This is directed by Hideaki Anno, who directed Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman. This is his third Shin movie. And so just like those 2 movies as before it, it's sort of like 3 different things mashed together. I think one, he himself is a huge fan of these original properties, and he really is trying to bring a lot of that original stuff into the movie. So there's a lot of the original music put into this. A lot of the sound effects are lifted straight from the original and put into it. Things like that. And like I was saying, shot for shot stuff is really similar for the fights and things. So there's that aspect. Another aspect is, of course, he has to kind of consider appealing to a general audience as well. This isn't, a movie. It's got to make its money back. And then the third thing is, he did Evangelion and all of that. So his style can get very just weird and surreal and things like that. So it's always this balancing act of those three things. And usually it works. But there's definitely times where one of those three will dominate and overpower the other two. And so depending on, which group you're kind of in there, which group you like, it may or may not appeal to you. So kind of like the two Shin movies before this, the CG, speaking of things that might kind of turn people off a bit, there's definitely times where the CG looks fake and like noticeably fake. There's the fight against the bat and he's flying for a bunch of it, and that moment really stands out. He looks really weird and rubbery and cartoonish. It doesn't work at all, and I don't know if that was a stylistic choice or if that was just a limitation of budget and stuff like that, or maybe they didn't have time. I don't know. From my understanding, this movie was actually shot like a few years before, but maybe because of Corona it got delayed or something like that. So I guess they've had enough time to work on it. Like, for example, in Shin Ultraman, the CG there looks kind of weird and fake, but it's not distractingly so, and it works within that film, I think, because they are these weird alien creatures and stuff like that. In this one, it's weird. Sometimes it's distracting. Like, there's a moment, very, very light spoilers, but there's a moment when Rider 1 and Rider 2 are having a fight, and they're jumping around this kind of industrial area, and they look pretty fake. It's kind of like in the old, maybe the first Spider-Man movie, when there's a few moments when he's swinging around the city or jumping around and he looks a little too rubbery. It kind of has that feel to it, I guess. Which, it's fine. Like, it's easy enough to look over. It didn't really bother me that much, but it definitely stood out. So that might affect some people's enjoyment of some of the things in it. Let's see what else. So the humor in it is sparse. It's a pretty serious film. There's little moments of levity here and there, but for the most part, it's played pretty serious, especially compared to the old show, which was pretty just funny and like a lot of, corny, light fluff. It was just for kids, and so they weren't afraid just to ham it up and stuff like that, that worked well for that show. But this one is taken pretty seriously. Rider 2, he's a little bit more jovial and things like that, but Takeshi Rider 1, I don't even know if he smiles throughout the whole film. I'm just trying to remember now, but if he does, I don't even remember it. Like, he's pretty gloomy, I guess, for the whole movie, or maybe that's not the right word, because he doesn't come across as like depressed or anything, but he doesn't seem really happy either. He's very kind of cold and distant, and I think that's a part of because he's just become Rider and Rider 1 and all this weird stuff's happening, and so it's kind of just taken him out of stuff. And then there's a bit about his history, which might be a part of that as well. There's some flashback stuff. For the most part, you're not going to get that kind of fun, lighthearted feel from the old show. It's played pretty straight for the most part. Let's see. So, for example, the costumes, they did a variety of stuff. So the two Rider costumes are spot on. They're really great, slightly updated versions of the originals. The chest piece in the originals is sort of like a foam that's been painted and sculpted and stuff like that. So in this, it's like a hard kind of armor piecing. Or on the back in the original, the wings, you can see like his little grasshopper wings on the back were just sewn into the jacket, I believe, or painted. No, they were painted onto the leather, I think, in the original. In this, they kind of look like separate little mechanical plates that are there. So there's little touches like that, or like on his gloves. You can probably see in the trailers and stuff. They have a little bit more of a protective, almost like motorcycle gloves on them. But, for example, in the old show, the gloves, they were just black leather gloves, and they would paint them green or whatever color they needed, whether it's for the Shocker, Kaijin, or the riders. They would just paint them the color that they needed. And so in the first times that they use them, they're really clean, but then bit by bit, the paint starts to chip off and you can see like the black underneath or things like that. So they actually have that in this, where the rider's gloves have been painted green, and you can see that it's like wearing out and chipping. And they could have just gotten like a green leather or whatever. They made it look super slick, but they were kind of letting that little stuff, they're paying attention to really how the originals were made and keeping that in this, which is really nice to see. Even I noticed that the bottom, the treads on his boots, they tried to kind of match it to the original treads on his boots in the old one, which is a really, most people are not even going to notice that, but I happened to notice that when I was watching the original today, and then they had a shot that showed the bottom in the new one. And it's like, hey, that kind of matches up. That's interesting. Or like the piping on Rider 2, he's got like the silver piping down his arms and his legs. And in the original show, that's always fraying and it gets kind of like fluffy almost. And so in this new one, they maintain that. So it's not like a super cool, slick, silvery stripe. No, it looks like that same kind of sparkly fabric. And you can even see a little bit, tiny bit, it's starting to fray in like a couple spots, which was nice to see. Those old costumes were like falling apart all the time. The paint was chipping. There's like, in one of the episodes, like there's just like a piece of leather hanging off of the arm of, I think, Rider 1 or something like that. Like they were just falling apart and chipping off and all this all the time. And they didn't go that far with the new one, but there's little hints of that in it, which is nice to see. For the Kaijin costumes, though, it's a mix. So like the bat is prosthetics, and he's got this weird mutated bat face, whereas the spider is like a helmet, very like slick looking helmet. Same with like the Hornet. She looks like a normal woman, but then she gets the helmet on and stuff like that. So they have this mix between some are kind of grotesque people, grotesque creatures, and then some are just looks like cool, slick costumes and stuff like that. The designs of them are pretty nice. When I first saw the spider in the trailer, I was like, I don't really like how that looks. Just looks like a guy wearing clothes. But like very light, very, very light spoiler. It's right at the beginning. He unzips those zippers on his jacket and like extra arms come out that he can use when he's fighting and stuff. So he looks more like a spider. So there's little things like that I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of winning me over when I was watching him in action and stuff like that. So another thing that is very light spoiler, when the enemies or the riders henshin, their faces start to kind of change. So they get like these lines and kind of these gaps opening up, or these patterns or lines on their face start to emerge. And I think that's their shocker animalistic side is taking over. And so right near the beginning of the film, Kamen Rider, he has his first fight, and then he's in like the bathroom of, I forget, just like a little cottage or something. And he's looking at like his bloody hands, and he has no idea what was going on. And he takes off his glove, and then his hand is, it's just like this weird creature hand that he has underneath his glove. And it's like becoming a grasshopper hand or something. It's really weird looking. If they henshin, that's kind of what they're looking like underneath their suits, which is kind of a cool way to represent, how much they've been changed and stuff like that. And I also think that hand is a bit of an homage to the original Shin Kamen Rider, which is a movie from, I forget when, but like the 90s, early 90s, which was like a standalone movie, kind of like a reboot, more adult reboot of Kamen Rider, where his suit is all organic instead, and it's coming, I think, from like kind of within him. It's a very Guyver type of thing. And so he's this bizarre looking, it's a cool movie actually, he's this bizarre looking kind of half man, half grasshopper thing. So anyways, I think that hand, it looked kind of similar to that design, so I think that was maybe a throwback to that, which is a cool little touch that they did. They also, I forget the name of it, so in the original show, there was it the cafe that they would go to, I think, or one of the places they would go to, it had a name on the front, and I saw it earlier today. I forget what it is now. But anyways, that name on that maybe cafe or whatever was on a paper bag that somebody was given in this movie. And it's barely on screen, and it's tiny. And you can barely see it, but it's the same font and it's the same name. And someone just hands somebody a bag, like a paper bag from a shop, and it's the same name. So there's lots of little things like that, I think, thrown in for people that are fans of the original, that they're going to catch that if they're paying attention. Both the riders are pretty much suited up for the entire movie, which was kind of nice. There's only one time, I think, when Rider 1 is wearing different clothes. Otherwise, he's wearing his rider suit, and when he's just kind of walking around doing normal stuff, he has the helmet off, and he's wearing like the black trench coat to kind of hide his suit. And so, like in the original, you usually never saw him in costume with no helmet on for Rider 1 or 2. It was always either street clothes or full costume. But in this, they take their helmet off sometimes when they're just talking or not fighting time, which is kind of cool. It's nice. It's nice to see them in this day and age. I get so tired of heroes with masks and heroes with costumes constantly taking off their masks or constantly taking off the costumes just so the actors can show themselves off. So I was happy to see, like, for example, the end fight. For most of that, they were wearing their helmets most of the time, or things like that. Like, they definitely were not afraid to show the costumes and have them fully suited up while interacting and things. And then when it's kind of cool down time, okay, they take off the helmets or whatever. So I guess before I get into spoilers, I'll just say that I definitely enjoyed it. It gets weird towards the end, and I think the third act is going to be the thing that kind of makes it or breaks it for most people. There's a sequence at the end that is really dark, and I wish it wasn't so dark, because it was really hard to see what the action was, and it looked like the action was entertaining there, but I couldn't see half of it. And I know it wasn't just my theater or something, because I saw somebody online saying, like, why was it so... I think somebody else saw it in IMAX, and they were like, why is it so dark? Is it an IMAX screen? But no, for me it was as well. Most of the fights and stuff are in the daytime, but there's just a bunch of stuff at the end. The last, like, 2 big fights are in really dark spaces, and that, coupled with the really close-up shots and the shaky cam, made it kind of hard to really understand what was going on with some of those final battles. You can figure it out, but it would have been nice if they just lit it a little nicer, or made things not so cut so fast or something like that. But yeah, I don't usually give things number ratings, but I think I'd give it like an 8 out of 10 or something like that. It held my interest the whole time. Most of the characters were kind of cold. I still liked the characters. They were interesting to watch. And I think it definitely paid its respects to the original show. You could tell it was made by somebody who loves the original show. So yeah, I don't know if this is the last of his kind of Shin movies, because after Godzilla, Ultraman, and Kamen Rider, is he going to do... Those are kind of the big ones, right? So maybe a Sentai? Maybe some Shin Sentai thing? I don't know. Who knows? But okay, so let's get into some spoilers now. So a big surprise that I really didn't... I had to be like, wait, am I making a mistake, or is that who I think that is? So I don't know who's familiar with Robot Detective K, which is from a completely... My understanding of it, he's from a completely different thing. He's from his own show. He was another tokusatsu character who... Kind of the famous image of him is this robot wearing, like, I think a burgundy or red suit and like a little cap, but then he's got this full metal face, and I think he's a robot. I've never really watched his show, but I'm just familiar with the character. Like, has he ever interacted with Kamen Rider? I have no idea, but he's not from Kamen Rider. He's from his own thing, but he had a pretty important role in this movie, which was... At first I was like, is that who I think that is? Am I misunderstanding something? This is all in Japanese. Maybe I'm confused about something, but no, it was him. And he's kind of working for the Shocker, kind of the main Shocker guys for the whole movie. And he's just kind of watching people and overseeing things. And he's wearing his suit. He's wearing his, like, red 2-piece suit or whatever. And he doesn't fight or anything like that. I don't even know where he ends up in the movie, actually. Now that I think about it, he's just kind of seen and then he never shows up again. Maybe it was just a matter of like, Hideaki Anno was like, hey, can I use this guy? You're never going to make a standalone movie for him. And they were just like, yeah, okay, we own the rights to it. Yeah, go ahead. But he was in there. That's kind of funny. The Shocker Riders show up at the end. So that really dark fight that I mentioned. So that's in a tunnel, and Rider 1 goes in there, and then he has to face off against, I don't know how many, like maybe 8. So in the original, they are like the evil riders, and they have like their scarves are different colors, like yellow and purple and I forget, green or something. So in this, they show up and they all have yellow scarves. I guess to simplify it, I don't know. And their eyes are all glowing. And so there's this big fight sequence in this tunnel. And they're all on motorcycles, and Rider 1's on his motorcycle, on his Cyclone. And they're going through this tunnel, and it's just this crazy fight. They all have these machine guns and stuff. It's all crazy. But it was really hard to make out a lot of that, which is unfortunate because I would have liked to have seen those Shocker Riders, in some hand-to-hand combat or something. I think they might have been all CG. And maybe they did it really dark to kind of hide that instead of having to get actors to do it. I'm not sure. But then Rider 2 shows up to help because they're kind of overpowering Rider 1 and they end up defeating them. But that was that really dark sequence. The other dark sequence was the very final battle, which at first kind of reminded me of like a Hokuto no Ken, a Fist of the North Star fight. It's just in this kind of empty black void a little bit. There's a little bit of a platform. And then the 2 riders are fighting this guy who he's the brother of Ruriko, and so they are the children of Dr. Midorikawa. And it turns out that he was like the first rider. He's Rider 0, and then Rider 1's Rider 1, Rider 2, Rider 2. And so he's got this butterfly motif, sort of. So he has a kind of a Kamen Rider suit, but it's all like a butterfly thing. And he's sort of the main bad guy at the end of this. So that fight is not as dark as the tunnel fight, but it's not super clear either. And it's really, there's a sequence in it where it's really close and really shaky. And that one part of that fight, that sequence of that fight was kind of pushing my patience as far as like, I don't think I can look at this right now. Like I didn't look away, but I was like, it's getting hard to look at. Like I think it's going to give me a headache because it was just too shaky in the dark, and it was hard to follow that. That's kind of a cool fight. So Rider 1 and Rider 2 have to face off against him, which really surprising, big spoiler, leads to the death of Takeshi, which I completely was not expecting. It completely threw me for a loop. But he dies at the end. So in this movie, when a human or an enemy are defeated, they turn into foam and they kind of disappear, just like in the old show. They would use like some bubbles in the old show, and they would play it in reverse. Actually, they'd shoot bubbles up from a hole, some foam, and then they would play it backwards, so it looks like they dissolve into bubbles and get sucked away. So they did the same thing in this movie. And so, yeah, the end guy, the Rider 0 and Rider 1 both just disappear into these bubbles. And so the final rider is left is Rider 2. And then he's kind of ready to give up at the end. And like kind of give up being a hero. But then he's given the original Rider 1 helmet. And it's like, okay, you got to become the main Kamen Rider. And so then he gets kind of his second paint job. So in the original, he has the single silver stripe. But then when Rider 1 comes back, he gets a new costume that I think has 2 silver stripes down his arms. So now Rider 2 has that look. And then it turns out that in that helmet is sort of the AI essence of Rider 1. So now he can kind of talk to him in the helmet, and they're kind of working together. It's a really, really big twist to the original story. And I was not expecting that at all. I didn't think he was going to die. So I don't know how people are going to feel about that. Yeah, I didn't want to say this before spoilers, but some of the kaijin have really short parts. So the Scorpion is played by a woman. She was actually, I think, the actress in Ultraman, Shin Ultraman. She's the one she grows huge, like to Ultraman size by mistake, and she's walking through the city. She plays like the Scorpion in this, and her sequence is really short. She's just kind of walking through, and people are trying to shoot her, and her henchmen shoot them, and then she gets killed like off camera and stuff. Like she's there for like 3 minutes or something. But then other ones have longer sequences. So like the Hornet girl, I think she's a Hornet or a bee. Yeah, Hornet in the original, I think. She has quite a long extended part in the film, and so does the Spider and stuff. So they're just kind of using everybody at different paces and for different roles and stuff, just to kind of get them to show up, I guess. Or like the Chameleon and the Kamakiri, the praying mantis, they're mixed together into one kaijin. It's kind of split right down the middle. He has the abilities of both, which is interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to have seen more of the weird organic costumes from the original show. I think that's one of the big charms of those original kaijin from the 70s, is they always had these really bizarre, kind of creepy looking, it wasn't supposed to be masks, but the actors were wearing these masks that were very low budget, so they're just very weird looking, right? So a lot of the characters have these, like I was saying, these kind of slick helmets that works really well for the riders and stuff, but I would have liked to have seen the bad guys have just more prosthetics used and stuff like that, just to make them match those old grotesque faces. But I guess, I mean, just off the top of my head, that's about it for now. If anybody has any questions or anything, just leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer from what I can remember. I know this review, I've just jumped all over the place, but I'm really just giving things off the top of my head as they come up. So if I've left anything out or something you'd like to know, yeah, just ask and I'll try to help. But anyways, that's it. But I do recommend it. I think it was fun. If you weren't turned off by the weirdness of Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman, then I think you'll be okay for this. I think maybe Shin Ultraman was kind of the testing point for a lot of people, where Shin Godzilla was very accessible. Shin Ultraman was much less accessible, but if you're a fan of the old one, I think you're a fan of that one probably. So I think this one's going to be even more like that, where if you're not a fan of the old show, then this will probably just be weird. Or if you're not a fan of letting that old show be adapted into this director's kind of unique take on things, if you're really adverse to a little bit of change, then it's not going to go very well for you. But if you just kind of go into it with an open mind, then I think you can enjoy it and get a lot out of it. But anyways, my rambling's done, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.